Okay, our next video is more segment addition. Today we're going to look at segment addition closer with midpoints and how midpoints come into play. So our first example, we want to find QS, segment QS's length, and segment PQ's length. We've got a little bit more complicated of a diagram going on here than we did the day before. I look at all the information. My eye is drawn right here. I see that this whole segment here is 78 and QR is 28. That's going to let me find PQ. I can do 78 minus 28, which leaves me with my segment PQ equaling 50, which is good. That was one of the things that we wanted to find. We wanted to find that length. So PQ is equal to 50. We've answered one of our questions. Now we want to find the length of QS. I'm going to start at Q. I'm going to go all the way to S. So QS is found by putting together QR and RS. So to find that, we just have to add those two pieces together, which is going to give us 55. So we've answered our two questions. We found our two lengths using our segment addition from yesterday. Just a little bit more complicated of a diagram, more pieces that we have to look at. All right, number 2. Solve for X and find AB, BC, and AC. When I look at my diagram, there's something a little bit different in this diagram than what we have seen. I see this little indicator. This indicator is telling me that segment AB has the same length as segment BC. These two pieces are equal. What that means is if AB has a length of 10, then BC has a length of 10. Whatever this length is, this has to have that same number representing it. And that's important because these two segments are equal. It allows me to set up an equation for those segments. I don't know what number AB equals. I don't know what number BC equals. I don't know what the length of the whole AC is. I don't know any actual lengths, but I do know that these two pieces are equal. So we can set 10x plus 4 equal to 5x plus 44. Anytime something is congruent or the same, just think about what that equal sign means. It means that they have the exact same value. Then we have our x on both sides. We move the smaller of the two x's over. Again, that keeps our x value positive and kind of limits how many negatives we have to deal with. We want to isolate the x, so we move the 4 over. Since I'm adding 4, I subtract 4 to isolate. Left with 5x is equal to 40. 5 times x, so to get rid of the 5 and move it over to isolate the x, the opposite of multiplying is dividing. And we find that x is 8. So step 1 is done. Now we want to find the length of AB, BC, and AC. So if I know what x is, all we have to do is plug that in. So 10 times 8 is 80. 80 plus 4 is going to give me 84. So we know that AB is equal to 84. We don't actually have to do any more plugging in and work if we didn't want to. We can. So we know that x is still going to be 8. So 5 times 8 is 40. 40 plus 44 is, again, 84. I knew this was going to be 84 because my graph indicated that they were congruent. So step 2, BC is also 84. And then I want to put all of that together. And then to find AC, we want to combine all of that together. So you've got your 84 plus your 84, leaving us with AC as equal to 168. Now when we have two equal pieces, when it's the same length on one side, 84 and 84, that means that B is going to be your midpoint. It's the middle point. And it's going to cut that segment into two equal pieces. So when we go on to number 3 where it says G is the midpoint of AB, I know that if G is the midpoint, that means that this segment is equal to that segment, which again is going to be very useful. I would set these two pieces equal. Unlike example 2, we don't have what GB is, but I do know that they're equal, so if AG is x minus 3, then GB is also x minus 3. They're the same. If they're the same number, they can be represented by the exact same expression. So it's going to take 2 of these segments, 2 AGs, which is x minus 3, to equal the whole of 8x minus 21. You could just add it twice. X minus 3 plus x minus 3 is equal to 8x minus 21. Adding it twice is the same as multiplying by 2. So we distribute 2x minus 6 is equal to 8x minus 21. We move our 2x over. Again, I want to move the smaller x so that my x's stay positive. We add the 21 over. We always do the opposite operation. So a negative 6 plus 21 is going to leave us with 15 equals 6x. We divide by 6. And it's not a perfect number, but we can reduce our fraction. They both divide by 3, so x is equal to 5 halves. Or you could also write that x is going to be equal to 2.5. Because it divides equally and I have a perfect decimal, I can write it as a decimal. If it's not a perfect decimal like 1/3, which is 0.3 repeating, you have to write it as a fraction. So I always want exact answers. It can be exact fractions or it can be exact decimals as long as it's exact and you haven't rounded to get there. All right, number 4, we are given segment AB. C is the midpoint of AB. So we go ahead and we write our C in there. And if C is the midpoint, that means that AC has to be at the same length as CB. Then we go and D is the midpoint of AC, which means AD has to be equal to DC. And then from there we find that E is the midpoint of AD. Okay, so then that means AE is equal to ED. Gotta go further, and F is the midpoint of AE. So we've cut that in half as well, giving us those two congruent segments. What we do know that is FE is equal to 4. So from F to E, this is 4. Well, if this is 4, if that's the midpoint, remember, cut it in half, 2 equal pieces. So if that's 4, then this is 4. Then we can work backwards. 4 and 4, AE, segment AE is going to be 8, which means segment ED is going to be 8. And then we go to AD. AD is 8 and 8, which is going to give us 16. And if AD is 16, then DC is 16. Because every time we have that midpoint, we're just cutting it in half. So we're going to have 2 equal pieces every single time. And then last, from A to C is 16 and 16, which is 32. So this is 32 and this is 32. And our end goal here was to find out what AB is. From A to B, since C is the midpoint, that's 32 and 32, we add those 32s together and we find that AB is going to be equal to 64. So it's a midpoint of a midpoint of a midpoint. You're continuing just to break it down into 2 equal pieces. Once you get your smallest piece, work your way out. Next page, you've got a backside here. Find AB and BC. So we've got a little bit more of a complicated diagram like we did before. The very first example for the video today. I want to find AB and I want to find BC. If I look at AB, in example 1, you could have solved for either missing piece first. There was no order. You had enough no matter what. But when I look at this, there is no way right now I can find out what AB is. So I've got to start with this segment from B to D. I'm given that from B to D is 25 and this part is 17. So to find this, let's go ahead and erase that. I would do 25 minus 17, leaving me with segment BC as 8. So we have to find BC first. I can't find AB. I need this piece of information. Once I know that BC is 8, just like here, I know that the whole segment from A to C is 30. If this is 8, to find AB, we have to do 30 minus 8, giving us 22. So this one's a little bit harder than number 1 because there's an order that you have to go to. There's not enough information to find AB first. And our last one, using example 5, that diagram, we want to know, is B a midpoint? When you're explaining, you want to think about what the question's asking you. The first thing that you want to do is answer the question. In this particular case, it's asking, is B a midpoint? So that's a yes or no question. It is or it's not. So is B a midpoint? To determine this, if B was the midpoint, what would that do? B would cut it into 2 equal pieces. So from A to B, does that cut it in half? A to B is 22. Now I need to find from B to D. From B to D, this is 25. So our answer here is no. B is not a midpoint. So the first thing you've got to do is actually answer that question. And it seems so obvious, but that's one thing that we often overlook as we get into the explanation part before we actually answer. The second thing we want to do is indicate what you found and your calculation. So we want that math support. Indicate your findings. So no, B is not a midpoint. We found that segment AB is equal to 22 and segment BD is equal to 25. We're actually given that BD is 25 in the diagram. Once you've indicated your findings, you want to tell why this either fits or does not fit the situation. So tell why this, so you want to tell why these findings allowed you to draw your conclusion. So we said no. Why did we say no? So no, B is not a midpoint. We found that AB is 22. We found that BD is 25. What does that mean? So the question is asking about a midpoint. A midpoint divides a segment into 2 congruent pieces. In this case, AB is not equal to BD, therefore B is not a midpoint. So answer the question, support your answer with mathematical findings, and then 2, say what you have and tell why it justifies, supports, or does not support your conclusion. So a midpoint would need to be 2 equal pieces. Because we don't have 2 equal pieces, it's not a midpoint. All right, and with that, we are done with our more segment addition video.